Strategies to take cost out of every acre while leaving the yield intact. That's the topic of this episode of XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve.
Welcome to XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve podcast, where real farmers share real insights and real results to help you improve your farming operation. And now, here's your host, Damian Mason.
Hey there, welcome to another fantastic episode of XtremeAg's Cutting the Curve. We're rolling into the new year. It's 2025. We know that commodity prices are a little bit on the downturn, and we know that things are getting a little snug on farm economics. That's why we've been covering this in a lot of different angles. This time, we're going to cover it with Johnny Verell, our XtremeAg guy from West Central Tennessee, and Peter Rousonelos, who's with Meristem Corporation, one of our business partners. And you know what? I proposed this topic. I said, this is very pertinent. We know that things are really getting a little snug. There's so much spend on a per acre basis at the farm level. What if you want to take 10, 20, 30, 40 bucks out? Where do you start looking at where you can peel some money back, shave off some expense, and not actually feel a burn for doing so? Peter, I'll start with you. Before we hit record, you said, I don't like to tell guys to avoid fertility, and then you said...
Right. Yeah, no, fertility is definitely something that, a lot of people like to go after fertility when it comes to saving money. And like John, I do farm some as well, and also part of Meristem crop performance. So I kind of see it from both sides. And I do see fertility, though, as a lot of times we apply every year, and there is a significant amount of inefficiency to fertility. I'll pick on phosphorus as an example. We get typically 10 to 15% of our phosphorus that we apply the first year. Most of it ties up, and a lot of it ties up, and we never actually see access to it again. And in most markets, we've got anywhere, universities will tell you 8,000 pounds upwards to 30,000+ pounds of phosphorus in our upper inches of our soil profile. So that's the first place my mind goes to. It doesn't mean don't put on phosphorus fertilizer. It means that this could be that type of year that you take that cost out completely and utilize other technologies that might be available in the market to increase phosphorus solubility, so that we're feeding that plant. So I look at feeding the plant in years like this and not necessarily maybe making huge deposits in my bank account.
Johnny, you're nodding your head. I thought there was an old rule when you're a farmer and you want to chase yield, you throw fertilizer out there in excess because the neighbors are going to drive by, and if you don't have big crops, all of a sudden you get judged. So you know what? Don't ever cut back on fertility because neighbors will judge you. You're nodding your head, though. You think you can take some money out of fertilizer.
Yeah, I think you can. I think kind of like what Peter was saying, it's not the time of year to be putting it in the bank. Let's see what's out there. Let's take soil samples. Let's tissue sample, let's sap sample test, and let's see where the crop is, and let's feed it what it's needing throughout the year. I think that's one of the big takeaways that we've been learning the last few years, and going into a year like this, it's definitely going to be a year to kind of watch what you're putting out there for the crop to have, because we really need it to have what's available now. And I think along the lines of what Peter's saying, there's several products you can put out there to make that happen.
All right, let's go with another. Since he led off with reduce. What's the old thing that the environmental movement started 20 years ago? Reduce, reuse, recycle, repurpose. So that's a reduce. Recycle. Is there any way, you talk about fertility. I was at your farm, but we talked about using the products that melt down and break down is this a year that you rely more on the recycle part? What are you thinking on that on the Verell farms?
I would say so. We've already started spraying stubble digesters out this fall, going into this spring, trying to make sure what we have out there is available, especially in some high residue crops. We are in the South. We do get a lot of breakdown, but it still takes several years for corn stalks to break completely down. You go just, a couple of states north, and they could have residue on top of the ground for years. So I would, really look into, if I have never done it, I would really look into using stubble digesters on our farm or on your farm, because for us, the test we done on our farm last year was about 40% reduction from November to about March. So it doesn't take very, very many months at all to really see a big reduction in residue on top of that ground.
All right. So we're saying we're trying to peel expense out of every acre. Can we make that a stubble digester is actually peeling expense back? Can we make that argument? Because somebody's going to say, yeah, but I had to spend money on the stubble digester.
Yeah, you do, but you got to look at it more in one ways, and Peter can chime in on this, but, not only are you releasing more nutrients that are already out there on top of the ground and putting them back into the soil to be used, but you're also probably going to be reducing some tillage needs too. So you can look at it from a fertility standpoint to a tillage standpoint. There'll be less residue on top of the ground, be less to handle in the spring if you're having some type of issues to plant into. So, it's multiple applications. A lot of times, I guess we can kind of transition to that a little bit too, Damian, is, you can piggyback these applications into a tank mix you're already going out with. So if you're doing a fall burn down, you could throw a product like that in there. And it's not a special trip. It's already tank mixed in, just a piggyback application.
All right, so I like that. First off, you're saying that it is a new expense, but also you're getting your bang back out of it, so it more than pays for itself. And then also you're not making an extra trip because it goes in there with a fall burn down. So I think the big thing is if we're talking about dimes, we're talking about dollars. Peter, you cover a lot of ground, you cover a lot of farms in this. Where do you see a chance that farming operations, this time of year, wintertime, can do something that peels a little bit of expense back?
Well, I'll first start with completely agreeing with John there on the stubble digester. So we sometimes look at those as a fall applied only application. And there's a lot of information, there's a lot of data out there in the market that you can look into that we know. So I'll touch on this topic for just a minute, is that we know there's a lot of fertility, especially found in a corn crop. As an example, 200 bushel corn crop has 90 pounds of N, 18 pounds of phosphorus, and 104 pounds of potassium in the stover. Some people call that trash. What I call it, treasure. That is true fertility dollars that have been spent by the farmer. And you mentioned recycle. Now let's reuse, right? So find a way to reuse that. And that's using a stubble digester. As John mentioned, if you could do that in the fall, that's great because you can actually take a tillage pass out, which most universities, I think, put a tillage pass now at about $18 to $20 an acre. So you found the $20 bill just taking tillage out.
We said if we wanted to just save $20, we can do something that just takes off. And by the way, there's going to be hardcore tillers on here that say, but that tilling that sets the soil, and it sets the seed bed and all that. And I would say my 55 years around this industry tells me that farmers love tilling more than the ground loves being tilled.
Love, true, absolutely. But like you said, though, working into spring, let's say that window's closed, we can still utilize that even in a tillage situation, because when we till, what are we really doing? We're breaking up the top layer of the soil profile. We're not flipping it over. We're not plowing anymore. We're actually just moving that residue around, maybe breaking it up into some smaller pieces, which is going to help digest it. But really, it's still all sitting there in that upper 2-3 inches of soil profile. So these stubble digesters that can be applied can still work to break down, increase nutrient availability out of that stubble, which really farmers will say, a lot of people will say, Peter, I get that sooner or later, but really it's about sooner or later, which one matters more than the other. It's getting it sooner so we can use that nutrition in season, because once it does come available, nature's going to take its course. Phosphorus is going to tie up, and potassium is going to want to leach away from that plant. So we can manage that more effectively, so we can recycle, reuse, and actually utilize that nutrition in season, which means you could take fertilizer costs out, whatever that is from a comfort level for your own farm. But you can easily take $30, $40, $50 worth of fertilizer costs out. Again, maybe not on an every year basis, but definitely when you start looking at how do I achieve a better profit margin in a year like this? And I'll make one other comment about that. There's a lot of research around corn residue, any grass residue that actually has a carbon and nitrogen ratio of 57-1. Now, what does that mean? That means when we have a 57-1 carbon and nitrogen ratio, we immobilize nitrogen, which means we as farmers, we have to put on more nitrogen when we're in a corn on corn scenario, or corn following wheat, or whatever the case may be when we are grass to grass. We utilize these stubble digesters, we can actually bring our carbon to nitrogen ratio down closer to more of a corn soybean rotation. And there's a likelihood we could start to remove some of that nitrogen that we would otherwise have used to offset that penalty. So there's a lot there, but these stubble digesters, we're finding significant amount of value when we manage the acre properly.
Johnny, the guy started off by saying we got cut fertility application, and now all of a sudden I said, but the farmers will judge us. And now he's talking about cutting nitrogen. Has he not gotten the memo that in North American agriculture, the one thing you never do is cut back on nitrogen? You got to keep putting more nitrogen out there because that grows big, tall corn, and then all of a sudden you can tell everybody how tall your corn is. Is he not getting the memo? Wait a minute. I've been to your field. I was at your field day. I was at your field day where you actually purposefully cut back nitrogen. So anyway, is this the year to go ahead and be a little bit put your agronomist hat
I
on?
think what Peter's talking about there, if you can make this residue, this carbon go away, then you're not having to tie up. So you won't have to apply as much to feed that crop, because we've all seen that happen before. When you got heavy residue on top of the ground, it really does tie that nitrogen up. So I think he's just saying you can apply products that can help you farther in the year with reducing some of your other inputs because of the tie-up issues. So
By the way, isn't the key then to just get the carbon into the carbon cycle in the dirt? In the soil? Is that the idea, Peter?
It's to get that cycle going that naturally is going to break down, and when it naturally breaks down, that soil biology requires a food source. So it takes our nitrogen that we apply, utilizes that as a food source, and breaks that to break down that residue. If we can kickstart that process, we can narrow the window that it takes for that to happen. We bring that ratio down, so we start to mineralize more nitrogen, because really we've got tons and tons of nitrogen in our soil profile. We just can't access a lot of it because it's doing other work for us to break down our residue. So we're just helping that process. So the summary is, if you utilize a stubble digester, I believe on a one-off, you can absolutely likely take most of your fertility out in your P and K and it not hurt you, because you're going to focus on your stover that's out in the field. But long-term thinking, we can also become better managers and better stewards of our nitrogen spend once we start to realize the other benefits that exist with a stubble digester.
Mr. Verell, does it take a little downturn like this? Because, 2020 through 23 were really good, but we got a little smarter about things. Does it take a little downturn like this to make you better? Like you're starting to look at things that when the tide was up and there's a lot of froth, but now you got to go, in other words, I'll go with reduce, recycle, repurpose, reuse, rethink. This is kind of the time where it makes you rethink.
yeah, I think it is, but I think a lot of farmers the last 3-4 years have really been looking at what can we do to start reducing. Not in an economic downturn, but at least if So we've been doing trials the last 3 or 4 years on our farm, trying to figure out what nitrogen rates do we really need for us? How low can we cut? Can we go from a 1.2 nitrogen ratio down to 0.8, 0.9? And that's where we are now on our farm. And it's taken us several years to get there, but it prepares you for years like we're going into right now where things are a lot tighter. And I think that's the big thing to take away, is for people to always be trying things on their farms, trying new products, trying to see what works. Does this stubble digester work? Does this phosphorus product work for them? Just starting to learn what it is along the way. And then when things like this happen, you can really start playing and plugging in these new products that are out there to really help you lower that input cost.
So we talked about stubble digester. We talked about fertility reduction because there's probably enough fertility. And then also we talked about carbon to nitrogen ratio. And that's just a matter of getting better agronomically, which we are than we were just 10, 20, 30 years ago. What about on rethinking, when you look across the farming acres you got to cover and you need to pull back? I came to you with an assignment and I said, give me $5 an acre of savings, whatever. You would go to, hopefully you'd turn to our friend Brian, who I haven't seen for a long time, my friend Brian Adams, my second favorite Mississippian after Mac McAnally. If you don't know who that is, look it up. Used to sing with Jimmy Buffett, songwriter. Anyway, where are you rethinking also on your operation where you can peel back $5 or $10?
We were kind of talking a little bit beforehand, what can we do to reduce some passes throughout the year? So like if we're going to be spraying, we say we didn't want to weed and feed at the same time. A lot of times there's compatibility standpoints. The reason we weren't doing that is that something we can start looking at. So if we're spraying a herbicide, is there a product that I could feed to that crop to help with some nutrient uptake? And then along that same line, when we're planting, a lot of times our planters are set up with in-furrow and 2x2. A lot of times you don't want to do those things because they take time. But in a year like this year, if I can cut an application out, reduce the rate of fertilizer I'm going to put out because I'm going to band it and put it right in that root zone, that's where times like this, when things are getting a little bit leaner, we can go in there and start doing some things where we're actually putting the product right in the root zone where it needs to be and not broadcasting it. So for us on our farm, we're probably going to try to reduce an application pass, maybe 2 throughout the year, and then turn around and put the same products out, just put them out at different timings and piggyback them. And then at planting, we're going to really try to focus on what can we put out in furrow and 2x2 to really help boost those yields, get that better ROI, but also reduce that input cost.
So you're going to do a little bit more at time of planting, and you already do a lot at time of planting, and you took the 2x2 because I pay attention. Peter, I recorded with him last year. He took the 2x2 off of his planter, and now you're talking about doing more at at the time of planting, are you putting 2x2 back on? No, because it doesn't work that well for your.
Well, I've got dribble system, so I'm not putting the knife system back on. I'm actually just going to be dribbling it right on each side of this row. There is what I'm going to be doing with a lot of my fertility. So.
All right. And then you said weed and feed, you're going to make when you're going across, you're going to, but you mentioned the compatibility. If I save $10 because I didn't make an extra pass an acre, but I lose efficacy, did I really gain anything?
Yeah, but I think now we've learned what works and what doesn't work. There's several products out there that you can source that have no issue with compatibility now. A lot of this has been changed over the last few years. There's reasons you were doing it and stuff like that, but
yep.
You know.
Peter, on the sticking with our theme, rethink. Where do you think there's room to rethink again from yourself being a farmer and then all the ground you cover in your job with Meristem?
Yeah, so I mean, I like to say one way to decrease costs is increase bushels. So I mean, if we can, do what we're talking about, recycle, reuse, a lot of our nutrients through stubble digesters. I think also, when we look at our nitrogen applications, John mentioned it, right? The 4 R's have been around forever: right place, right time, right source. And so you start looking at, can I do a better job timing wise? Can I place it better so the plant can use it more effectively? And that's what John's doing there with his planter, placing it right near that seed at a time closer to the time the plants can use it, which allows you typically to cut back, because time is our enemy when it comes to nitrogen applications. The earlier you put it on, the longer it's got to hang out there. So if we're going to do that, consider using a nitrogen management product as well that will hold it or maintain it in that root zone or in that plant longer. You may be able to reduce them in that way. So nutrient use efficiency, I know that's NUE has been used and overused multiple times, but it is legitimate and true, and things that I think we all should dissect and understand better. Then I look at in season and I say, okay, I still want to feed that plant. I don't want to give up bushels. Part of this podcast was reducing costs, but producing as much or more.
Yeah.
And so how do you fuel the fire in season so that we continue to maintain our yields that we're used to or higher, because that's how we can outpace the cost of production. And so I look at things like, yesterday, I was visiting with a gentleman that told me he was going to spend with his traditional methods. We call it the splash and dash, which is they're going to put on fungicide at about VT on corn, and they're going to spend $40 an acre. I'm not going to pick on a brand or anything like that, but you get into some of these very high priced fungicide products and applications and things, you get in there and it's a one-time app at 40. I look at that and I immediately say, there's a better way I can do that by maybe spending 20 or 30, but I utilize, lower cost fungicides that are out there that still do a good job, but I might put it on twice. And as John said, I might be able to put that on when I'm applying a herbicide, and then I might be able to put that on again later. And I focus on how I can better manage my plant health through the season with maybe less costly products that perform the same function if I do it more than once. And I can pair that with other foliar plant nutrition, other stress mitigation products, things that I can take that spend $40, reallocate it so that maybe I save a little or maybe I spend the same, but my end result is I produce more.
Yeah.
That's the other, when I look at how to better manage my acre, I'm not looking to cut and save my way into prosperity. I'm looking at cutting the things that are maybe less efficient, like fertilizer, and creating efficiency there, but then really fueling the fire in season in a way that maybe I can take a cost that I'm just kind of spending because that's just what you do, and I find a better way to spend it.
That's kind of on the other repurpose. Are you taking anything out, like in way of fungicide, Johnny Verell, and then deciding to take $40 of fungicide out and putting 20 of that 40 into something else, and then deciding that you're going to be okay? Is there any decision about a repurposing that you might be doing?
Yeah, so what we're probably going to do is we'll run a cheaper fungicide probably at V10, and then we'll really watch that crop, because southern rust is our biggest issue. We don't have tar spot in our area yet, so it's probably coming, but we'll put out something cheap early on and then watch that crop, because we're talking about, a $10, $12 fungicide cost doing it that way, and then be watching for that rust, because it's very hard for us to protect the crop from, say, V10 all the way to brown silk with one fungicide anyways. If rust comes in, 30, 40, 50 days is a long time to protect with any fungicide out there. So it's a lot easier for us to do something cheap on the front end like we did this year, and then watch that crop, and we may never have to go back to that second application.
If you do have to go back, are you doing inexpensive version of the fungicide again?
It won't be the Cadillac version. It'll be another inexpensive version because we're combining the two to get the longevity that we're needing.
Yeah. So compared to two cheap shots, and Peter, you know this, I don't buy fungicide. Do two cheap shots of fungicide, not cheap, lesser priced fungicides, still cheaper than the Cadillac?
Yes, in most cases that is the case. You can do it for less. And John mentioned how to manage it.
And I don't have tar spots. Some of these diseases that are out there, there's very few that are actually going to handle holding those diseases back. So for where I'm at, I can get away with it. Southern rust is our enemy, and it can be protected fairly cheap still.
Good.
And Damian, we do have northern. We do have tar spot in a lot of geographies, and where I live, we battle with tar spot. And
you're in Eastern Iowa, aren't you?
So I live in home for me is North Central Illinois, right along Interstate.
Don't you hate it, Johnny, when people that are from like God's country, he's got 19 feet of topsoil, and like he could fling corn out the window of his truck when he drives by and still do 200 bushel corn, and he's bitching. I don't know if I can handle this, Johnny. I mean, would you agree that he just needs to stop whining?
Yeah, and the big fields, throw that in there, Damian. We're down here. We turn every 30 seconds. They turn every 30 minutes. So.
His small patch is 120 acre square, right?
Yeah. Those small fields.
Okay. We did reduce, we did recycle. We talked about you can probably get by with less P. And then we talked about recycle. We talked about stubble digesters. We talked about recycling. We talked about also making sure your carbon to nitrogen ratio is good. We talked about repurpose. We talked about fungicide. We talked about reuse, and that was a big one. You guys went down the road of there's a whole bunch of stuff that you've got fertility that's already out there. Peter rattled off the numbers, 104 pounds of this and all that. And that's reusing what you've already got in there. And we did rethink. Weed and feed, putting more stuff on at time planting. You reduce one pass. It's $11 just in the equipment and fuel, maybe, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, and then your time and stuff like that. Yeah, you could save $10 pretty easy, $12 some cases by just reducing one pass.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you got a human that's sitting in that machine, and that's not easy. All right, last thoughts. Any other rethinking that a person listening to this is like, hey, I hadn't thought of that. Thanks for the idea on trying to back out some expense. Peter, you go first. Johnny gets the last word.
Well, one thing I'll throw out, because I know we talked a lot about corn here. Corn is king in a lot of areas, or at least we talked a lot about that type of application. Soybeans, another crop. I was having a conversation just this morning with a producer, and we were talking about these stubble digesters and this recycle reuse. And I'd been at a university speech, actually, that I witnessed here a couple of weeks ago, where they made the comment that, soybean production in the U.S. is, I think, the 52 bushel is the highest we produce as a nation. You take the great state of Illinois, as you talked about, as good as we
By
think.
the way, that's an average. Just a person says, wait a minute, I do more than that. He means the national average.
That's
the national average is around 50. The highest has been around 52 and a half or 3, I think. Yep. Yeah. So go ahead. Sorry.
Produced in 2016. The highest in Illinois is 62, if you can believe it. So, I mean, it's not that much greater. So average. So when you think about that, we fertilize in front of soybeans, we fertilize in front of corn. Corn is king, and it's hard to, and for those that are struggling with maybe this conversation where they say, hey, I just can't remove fertility out of my corn. I just can't bring myself to do it. Think about soybeans and how much fertility is out there in your stover or in that residue from the year before, whether you worked it or not. Utilize a stubble digester and just consider not putting on P and K in front of your soybeans. That's $100 bill in most cases. You can do it for about 15 or $20, and you can get your economics right on your soybeans. If there's one thing you're going to do, that's something to consider, is just utilize that fertility that's out there. Let it manage the soybean crop, and then manage your corn crop as you always have, if that makes you feel more comfortable. And then take some of these other pieces that we've talked about here with John and consider starting to work with them on your farm so you better understand them and grow confidence, because one of our missions, and especially here at Meristem, one of our missions is to grow more bushels for less cost. And that's going to be by taking down some of our current costs by utilizing other technologies, and then also raising more bushels. So that's my main takeaways on it.
I like it. That's a big one. We got through here really good. Okay. Rethink, reduce, recycle, repurpose, reuse, rethink. I added the rethink. That's not one that they used to come up with for the environmental movement, in case you remember that, Johnny. I mean, it's I just made that one up. So anyway, how are you rethinking?
Yeah, along the rethinking process there, I just think everybody needs to go to all the grower meetings that they can to hear what people are doing across the country. Damian, they need to get on here and look at all the podcasts or listen to all the podcasts that we've done, the videos that we've had, because there's a lot of trials that have already been done in their area. They may not know about them, and it saves a lot of headache. It tells you what products are working, which products are not working, because not all products are created equal. I think Peter would tell you that for sure. So, you got to look at that type thing. And then I would just sit down and say, hey, if I could save $10 an acre on 1,000 acres of corn, that's 10 grand. That's a big number this coming year. We just talked about it. You might reduce one trip across that field and piggyback that on, because on our farming operation, we used to put out a V3 primer shot. We didn't put it in there with a herbicide shot. We're trying to figure out how to combine those two together to cut that $10 out. So I would just tell people to try to work through this deal together, because together we'll figure this out. And there's a lot of good things already out there for them to look at.
Agreed. Fantastic. I like it. And yeah, you're right. Sometimes you think $10 could be an experiment. Well, maybe in some years, $10 is your margin. And that's just the unfortunate reality. But those of us, we've been around ag, we know that. Reduce, recycle, repurpose, reuse, rethink. We talked about how to take cost out of every acre you farm while leaving the revenue intact. You got some really good ideas. Peter Rousonelos, he's the Senior Vice President with Meristem Crop Performance. If you want to learn more about Meristem, they are one of our business partners here at XtremeAg. Go to MeristemAg. That's MERISTEM, meristemag.com. Johnny Verell, one of our XtremeAg guys from Jackson, Tennessee. If you want to see Johnny and I in action, make sure you go to Commodity Classic. You can go to Commodity Classic. You can see us there, because we're going to be doing panels. We're going to be doing a pancake breakfast. And we're even going to do a game show that Johnny's going to be a part of. He doesn't know it yet, but he's going to be a major personality on stage during the pancake breakfast. We want you to come to that. So you'll see me and Mr. Verell in action at Commodity Classic. And in between now and then, check us out at extremeag.farm. As Johnny said, hundreds of videos that they have produced on farm. I'm at some of them, and some of those videos at their field days, illustrating all the trials that they're doing. And then also, we've been doing this Cutting the Curve for 3.5 years. There are nearly 250 or 300 episodes of this. They're all free at extremeag.farm. So go check it out. Till next time, Peter, thanks for being here. He's on the road, came to us from a hotel along a road just so he could share this information. Johnny Verell took time away from babysitting to join you. So anyway, till next time, thanks for being here. I'm Damian Mason with XtremeAg.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cutting the Curve. Make sure to check out extremeag.farm for more great content to help you squeeze more profit out of your farming operation.